Good afternoon and namaskar, sir.
Hello. How are you?
Sir.
Can you hear me?
I'm fine, sir. Do you remember me? We met in 2010 in Delhi, Jamia.
Yeah, of course we did. Yes. Can you see me or not? No.
Now, no, sir. Earlier we were able to,
Earlier
but
you
now I think
it goes on and off somehow. The video.
now we can see you, hear you,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. Right. Great.
How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you. And this has gone well, has it?
Namaskar, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. With your blessings.
How are you? You hear me?
I'm fine, sir. Do you remember me? We met in 2010 in Delhi, Jamia.
Yeah, of course we did. Yes. Are we replaying it already? Tarakeshwar.
Hello, sir. Welcome.
How are you?
Fine, sir. आपकी दुआ.
अरे वाह क्या बात है. Yep. हैदराबाद में सीखा है पहले से पता था.
पहले से पता था सर.
अरे वाह. Very good. हैदराबाद में और क्या क्या सीखा है? बिरयानी. Yeah.
How is the weather in Delhi, sir, now?
It's pretty hot.
Oh.
Yeah. You know, it hovers around 40. Sometimes it goes above, sometimes it's below 30, 38, 39. In Hyderabad, it doesn't go above 35, does it?
Yeah.
It goes up to 44, sir.
It goes up to 44.
Yeah.
So I should not patronize Hyderabad, no?
But
Okay.
that is only in the 3 months, March, April, May.
Yeah. Hyderabad on the whole is not as hot, is it?
Only midsummer, I think it's hot. The rest of the year is pleasant.
Yeah.
Only midsummer, May and June until the monsoon arrives.
Yeah, that's right.
It's pretty hot.
And the monsoon arrives sooner in Hyderabad, no? Than in Delhi.
After it comes to Kerala only.
I see. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Hi,
Hello. This is
Harish.
Koki.
Good afternoon, Harish.
Hi, Shivramji. How are you?
I'm fine.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Namaste.
Namaste, Anand
This is
ji.
Anand.
Namaste, Anand ji. Kaise hain? How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, sir. Thank you so much. How are you, sir?
Very well, thanks.
Nice to meet you after.
Good to
long
be
time.
here. Yeah, good to be here.
Shall we begin, sir?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Chandrika Das, a PhD scholar from the Department of Translation Studies. I welcome each one of you to the last plenary of a 4-day online international seminar. I earnestly thank Professor Harish Trivedi for accepting our invitation and agreeing to speak this afternoon. We will now play a short AV which will introduce us to Professor Harish Trivedi and also to the immense contribution he has made to the field of translation studies.
Dr. Harish Trivedi is a well-known translator and an established name in the fields of translation studies, comparative literature, post-colonial studies, and Indian literatures. He was a professor of English at the University of Delhi and also a visiting professor at the universities of Chicago and London. He served in various academic bodies, holding several positions such as Cetra Chair Professor of Translation Studies for 2006. He was appointed the Secretary and Vice President of the Indian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies. He was also the Vice President of Comparative Literature Association of India. He became a member of the General Council and also a member of the English Advisory Board of Sahitya Academy in 2007. Besides translating a wide range of poetry and short fiction from Hindi to English, he also published several essays and encyclopedia articles on translation in India. He has authored Colonial Transaction, English Literature and India, and co-edited The Nation Across the World, Post-Colonial Literary Representations, Literature and Nation, Britain and India, 1800 to 1990. Together with Susan Basnett, Dr. Harish Trivedi co-edited Post-Colonial Translation, Theory and Practice, which was published by Routledge London in 1999. He also co-edited an issue of the Post-Colonial Journal, Vasafiri, with Theo Hermans in 2003. Harish Trivedi also edited Interdisciplinary Alternatives in Comparative Literature along with E.V. Ramakrishnan and Chandra Mohan. He has also delivered various lectures at prestigious universities such as the University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, and the University of Ghent.
Thank you, Taresh. I would also like to thank Professor Padikal for agreeing to chair the session this afternoon. Professor Shivram Padikal is a professor of translation studies at the Center for Applied Linguistics and Translation Studies at the University of Hyderabad. He is the author of the Kannada book, Nadu, Nudya Rupaka, Rashtra Adhunikate Mattu, Kannadada Modala Kadambarigalu. This book discusses nation, modernity, and the early novels in Kannada, for which he received the B. Sridhara Award and the V.M. Inamdar Award for Literary Criticism in 2003. The Oxford University Press has recently published the new translation of the first independent social novel in Kannada, G. Venkata Rao's Indirabai, translated by Vanamala Vishwanath and Shivram Padikal. This translation was long listed for the Atta Galata Book Prize of Bangalore Literature Festival and has been prescribed as a textbook for the undergraduate classes of the Mangalore University. It was also conferred the translation of the prestigious Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati Award from the Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati Pradhikara, the translation authority of the Department of Culture, Government of Karnataka. Professor Padikal, along with late Professor Padmakar Dadegaonkar, has translated from Kannada Sara Abubakar's novel Chandragiriya Tiradalli to Marathi for Panchtara, Hyderabad, and has edited with Professor Uday Narayan Singh, Suniti Kumar Chatterjee, A Centenary, Tribute for Sahitya Academy, New Delhi, and Vagartha with Tariq Khan for Center for Applied Linguistics and Translation Studies, University of Hyderabad. He is one of the editors of Sahitya, the International Journal of Comparative Literature, published online by the Comparative Literature Association of India, CLAI. Professor Padikal's research interests include, among other things, modern Kannada literature, translation studies, post-colonial studies, and cultural studies. He has widely published in Kannada and English. I welcome you, sir, and I request you to kindly take over the session.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great privilege to chair this session of Professor Harish Trivedi, who is one of my very senior friends and a great professor. There is no need to introduce him to any one of you because all of you know about it. In Kannada, there is a saying, Aja Gajantar. That means a difference between the elephant and the goat. Okay, I am a goat sitting here in the chair, listening to Professor Trivedi, the Gaja, okay, for next 1 hour or so. And I'm very happy to do that job. And I just want to tell you one anecdote about Professor Trivedi, okay, which has been actually published in a book in honor of him. That Professor Trivedi, whenever he takes a class, this is because he was, as you know, a globetrotter, always, most of the time abroad. Sometimes he will be in, a year or two, he will be in Delhi University. And whenever he takes a class, if it is a Trivedi's class in English department, it's not only the English students of English department who will come and attend his classes, but students, all students from different departments. And his classroom is always, it was said, crowded with students sitting on the floor, standing along the walls, etc., etc. And especially a seminar class of him will go beyond 9:30 in the late evening. Chaprasis and chowkidars of Delhi University of that particular building, perhaps cursing him. Okay, that is Harish Trivedi, and He is one of the speaker who never actually fails or disappoints us. Okay, that is why whenever we think of a translation seminar, we invite Professor Harish Trivedi. We will not allow him to nap. Have a peaceful nap at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And here is Professor Trivedi, and I am very proudly and very passionately present him to you. Professor Trivedi.
Thank you, Professor Shivaram Padikkal. With you around, with you in the chair, I know that we are all in safe hands, especially me. You have given the kind of introduction which is most gratifying and most slanderous. Let me settle some of the slanders before I proceed. My classes did not begin at 10 in the morning. So if they went on till 9:30, it wasn't that bad. This class began at 2:30 in the afternoon. It's an evening class. And only once or twice in all my teaching years did it go beyond, say, 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. But it is correct that once the chowkidar went away and the students and I were locked in, and we thought we'll have to spend the night in the seminar room. But somehow we were able to rescue ourselves. Escape came. Another slander that I wish to refer to, it seems to be especially popular in EFLU, is that I was always abroad. My university does not look kindly on these things. They would have sacked me long ago.
I know, sir.
But it is true that I was abroad often enough and perhaps long enough not to be the most popular among my colleagues. And not only in Delhi University, but all over India. I don't know whether to mention this. Let me try and make it anonymous. There was the vice chancellor of a certain university in Hyderabad who, newly appointed, one of the first things he did was to call a meeting of all the staff, and he told them what to do and what not to do over a lecture lasting for quite some time. And one of the things he said was, I don't want you to be like Harish Trivedi. This happened in Hyderabad. He said, I don't want you to go abroad.
Okay.
So some of it is true, Shivram, and some of it is not. Also, I must say that apart from what you said, I mean, that AV, I really felt like a film star. I've never had an AV presentation on me before, an introduction. What's happening? I mean, we are going places. I'm sure you've given it to all your speakers, but I haven't come across it before. And each time that somebody introduces me from a written text, from a well-prepared text, it's like having a Jyotishi read my Janampatri. Because he goes over all the past life. And if he gets many things wrong, then I expect that he will also be able to, if he gets many things right, then I expect he might be able to predict the future also. And each version is different. So I look with totally rapt attention to what is there, what is left out in the written version of my CV in the book of abstracts. It's not the same as was read out in the AV. There were differences. I noticed that the phrase apart from occurs quite often, and also, and besides, and one phrase, one word I love. Parallelly, I loved that I can do two things at the same time. Sure. Very pleasing. All these protocols of academia are extremely pleasing. I must also say a word about Tarakeshwar. One thing about Tarakeshwar from what I've known is, and the little glimpse that I had today, is that he's one person who cannot be reconstituted. Yes, remain what he is.
Or improved.
Well, become even more unreconstitutable. Yes. But is this word reconstitution that attracted me in the title of the conference that you have just had? We've had lots of reconstruction following on from deconstruction and much construction as well. And it's nice for us for these buzzwords to change from time to time. I think it's a wonderful thing that we should have at least new buzzwords to think about, to channelize our thinking. And the concept notes written accordingly. I asked Tarkeshwar if he was responsible for the word reconstitution, and he denied all responsibility. He said it had been suggested by some junior colleague in the department, and after the word had been adopted, he quickly left EFLU and went away. So as fearing that consequences might follow, perhaps. So the word reconstitution itself needs to be examined. The concept note I've read with great care. I've also read the book of abstracts with great care. I'm sorry I could not attend sessions in this conference because of what they call personal reasons. But that's a good blanket word.
Yeah.
But I've read all the abstracts. And I know that there are some universities that I had never heard of before, like Malavanchal University, like the Islamic University in Avantipur, like the NIIT in Rourkela. And there are people from all these places presenting papers here, which is extremely gratifying to see on a whole variety of subjects as well, including one that I will refer to later, even though I wasn't present at the paper. I've read the abstract. I'll spend 5 minutes or so, the next 5 minutes or so, on the concept note. What I find is, and this is regular academic practice, not only in India, not only at this conference, everywhere in the world, I think. Whatever the title, whatever the rubric of the conference, people present whatever they wish to present and whatever they happen to be working on or happen to have worked on. I'm afraid I can't do that. And this is for the reason that I'm never working on anything and have never worked on anything. And my mind is a tabula rasa. So I need to begin writing on it when I begin preparing to present a paper at a conference. And the place to begin is the title, on which I've already spent some time, and then the concept note, because that then gives me ideas perhaps to run with. I find that one of the things that is emphasized in the concept note is the agency of the translator. And assertive interventionist role in the discourses that are prevalent on the part of a translator. And an example is given that the role of the translator or translators in the formation of nationalist discourse was very important. Now, this is said positively, and I'm delighted to find that at last there is one positive reference to nationalist discourse, which seems to be completely outside the academic pale, more or less. But at least there's some use for nationalist discourse if interventionist translators had a role to play in the formation of it. I don't know how to take that. I thought nationalist discourse was constituted by the original texts which were translated. But if translation has a role to play above and beyond that, I'll be very interested to know more about it. This is not only relevant in my mind to nationalist discourse, it applies to all discourse. I'll again quote a phrase from the concept note. Translators reconstitute discourse by making silences speak, visibilizing the gaps, rupturing continuities, excavating ignored terrains. That's a rousing call to action. That really is a stirring phrase, formulation of what translators do and should continue to do. Unfortunately, I don't go along with that. I don't agree with that formulation of the role of a translator. I do appreciate that people may wish to do that, but my own sense is, and it's not only out of dialogic qualification or skepticism or playing the devil's advocate. No, those are good devices in a debate, but beyond that too, I do not know whether I can go along with the role of the translator that has been sketched out, that has been outlined in the phrase that I read out from the concept note. Let me try and present the opposite view, and let us see where we stand at the end of it. The opposite view, of course, I do present not as the devil's advocate, but as an advocate of the other party. There is a Purva Paksh and there is an Uttar Paksh. And I would say that if what I read out, what is said in the concept note of the conference is the Uttar Paksh, I may perhaps spend a couple of minutes outlining the Purva Paksh, what happened earlier before the new theorized agency and intervention of the translator came in, what existed before, and why that was not satisfactory for some people, and why we moved on from there to what we have today. Earlier, there was what Venuti called about 20 years ago, the invisibility of the translator. Translators were invisible. This was carried to extremes, actually. I mean, books published in India before 1950, let's say, which were translated, there's a very lively possibility that they do not even mention the translator anywhere in the book. Or if they do, it's in a place very hard to find. So yes, I mean, they were literally invisible, the translators. All that has changed, and that's not a bad thing at all. But what is meant by the visibility or invisibility of the translator? There's another phrase that goes along with it: smooth translation and resistant translation. Foreignizing, domesticizing, all these are regular counters that we play with in translation studies, well-worn counters that we play with. Where do we locate ourselves in relation to those? About visibility and invisibility, there is a metaphor that about translation that Venuti himself uses right at the beginning of that book. It's a quotation, and I'll remind you of it. Somebody saying, again the Purva Paksha, somebody saying that translations should be like a window pane. You should be able to see clearly through them. There should be complete transparency, and that a translation should be visible only if there is, who am I seeing on the screen? Anyhow, let me try to see through it. That translations should be so transparent, like a window pane, that only if there is a bubble in the glass or there's a scratch upon it, should it be noticeable. Now, that is, as I said, an older ideal, which could be taken too far, and then it became, the translator, therefore, like a window pane, became invisible. What were the consequences of the translator being invisible and the translator being visible? Let's look at both. There's not much harm, I think, in the translator being invisible. I don't mind being invisible when I'm a translator. Most of the time, much of the time in my practice, I'm very happy to be invisible. One of the reasons for that, which I offer for your consideration, is that the author of the original text is also similarly invisible. Let's make a distinction here before we have too many counter arguments. There may be a narrator that is visible. There may be a first-person narrator in a novel, for example, who is visible all the time. There may be an observer narrator who is visible part of the time. There may be an intrusive narrator who demands your attention and is aggressively visible. We know about all these devices of storytelling. But all these are narrators, they're not the author. The author remains invisible through all these kinds of narrators. And if the author of the original text remains invisible, if this seems to be a condition of the art, a condition of the very act of writing, then why should not the translator be invisible? It is the kind of presumption for the translator to be visible, loudly visible, if the author himself is invisible. I'm not saying that the author, that the translator should not be accorded any recognition in terms of mention on the title page, in terms of payment to copyright, in terms of all kinds of other recognition. There are prizes now for the best book, which, if it is translated, have the prize money divided equally between the translator and the original author. And I think that's a very good thing indeed. I even know of a case when an author of an original book offered that when a book was to be reprinted in translation, his book in translation, the translator should get 2/3 and the author only 1/3. Partly because the translation was so good, and partly also because it made the translation available, the book available in a language where it did not exist before, unlike, of course, the original text, which was already available in the original language and which could not have, without translation, become available anywhere else. Now, all these are not my idea of visibility. These are terms of visibility outside the book. And I'm all for the translator being as visible as possible outside the book. But being visible inside the book raises other kinds of problems. Let me offer, let not the translators set themselves up to be super authors or meta authors through their assertion and through their intervention. Let me also offer to you an opposite formulation, which is that translation is an act of submission, an act of love. And who said that? Not a bhakti poet, not Adi Shankaracharya. Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak said that. How can you be submissive and an interventionist agent at the same time? Is something that we need to think about. I love these portraits that keep coming up on screen. I hope they are listeners and not just good-looking people from an assorted combination of good-looking people who are there for their own sake. I also refer to one more thing in the concept note now, I'd like to, and then we'll move on. Gayatri Spivak also said something else in a lecture at Jamia Millia some 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, at which some of you might have been present, some of you may have heard about it, which I had the great privilege of chairing. She advocated that translators should act as agents of social change. If the text that they are translating is not advocating social change, the point for us to consider would be, how then can the translator be an agent of social change? One possibility is that the text may be reactionary, that the text may be patriarchal, and the translator then may airbrush it. The translator then may change and, if you like, censor it and take out all the offending parts, in which case it would not even have an exemplary value of a patriarchal text or an offending text. So it's very hard to then figure out how to exercise agency as a At the same time, I'm not denying that all translators, just by being translators, exercise agency. Whatever you do, there is agency involved. If you're translating a text without interventionist intentions, even that is agency. But there are layers upon layers in these questions. And I would submit to you that we may perhaps think about them not only in activist terms, but also in reflective terms, to arrive at some kind of a combination of the two. What I'll do now, and I think I'm already about 25 minutes or half an hour into my lecture, is to move to the second part, to try and prove that I have read not only the concept note of this conference, but one or two other things as well. I will consider, as my abstract said, 3 or 4 or 5 instances in terms of what the translator does. A variety of ways in which the translator is present, whether visibly or invisibly, whether in terms of intervention or whether in terms of can somebody take this guy off? That's all I see on my screen. No, it's not possible. Let me try and press view. Let's see what happens. No, nothing happens. Yeah, much better, much better. I finally got to gallery view, which I should know these things better. I mean, what have I been doing these 2 or 3 years? If not practicing all this, if not being subjected to all this. I'll take 3 or 4 or 5 examples of how translation is treated, regarded, or practiced in different situations. The first point may be of some interest to Ipshita, who is there, I saw, and with whom I've had some previous conversations about this. There is a new configuration of literature which actually values translation almost more than the original. Now, this is the supreme example of the visibility or the valuation, the valorization of translation. This new figuration is called world literature. I mean, there's no need quoting David Damrosch over and over again. He's modified it. Other people have said it differently. But world literature is a body of literature that would not be possible without translation. World literature is literature that circulates beyond its language of origin in translation. And one of the attendant formulations upon this is that it gains in translation, partly because it becomes part of the corpus of world literature, and partly also because it's proof that it has something in it which is worthy of circulation beyond the original, and which perhaps readers in the original had not even realized. So if translation is having the good, and if translation is becoming more visible in the sense that I described, not within the text, but outside the text, then world literature is certainly a location to look at. Why was it not like this before? Why is world literature, why do I say that world literature is presenting translation with opportunities it hasn't had before? Because in the classical definition of comparative literature, which was the prevalent formulation before world literature, still is, hasn't gone away, they're still strong in its own areas. In comparative literature, though this specification, this condition was diluted later on, it began comparative literature as a study of literature in more than one language, in 5 or 6 languages optimally, but at least 2 languages, without the help of translation. Number of people have said that if comparative literature has declined, in fact, 2 of them have said it's died, Spivak and Basnet, which is not true. There's obviously visible proof against the supposition that it might have died. It's still flourishing in some places, as it was before. One of the reasons for it not being regarded as what it used to be or practiced in the same way is that we admitted translation into the practice of comparative literature. That made it much easier, actually, for world literature to come and dominate. The door had already been opened. And then there is a third configuration of literature that is somewhat patronizingly called single language literature. I mean, most of us have grown up thinking that that was the only literature there was, and that comparative literature and world literature are fancy additions to it. That our basic idea of literature is literature in a single language. Now, that, of course, does not admit of translation at all. One has to know the language, one has to read that language, one has to operate within the parameters of that language and that literary discourse. And I might speculate that despite all the advances in terms of comparative literature, globalization, world literature, that perhaps still remains the single most prevalent form of study of literature. One should not be saying it at a conference like this on translation, but I think beyond this conference, that might still hold true. I will now proceed to looking briefly at the agency of the translator in for 3 cases. One, modestly enough, is the one book that I have translated in my whole life. And, other people have PowerPoints and they have slides and they have, I can't do any of that even now. And now I find that people are going away from that. So it's okay, fine by me. What I do instead in these Zoom presentations is I actually show the object of which other people take photographs and put them on screen. So let me see if it's there behind the arrows. Yep. This is the book that I translated. Premchand Kalam Ka Sipahi by Amrit Rai. This is the biography, the standard biography, the Sahitya Academy Award-winning biography. And this is how thick it is. It is, in fact, 627 pages in the Hindi original. And then I translated it as Premchand, A Life. And this is how thick that is. And this is 413 pages. From 627 pages to 413 pages involves a lot of agency, we might say. How did it happen? I mean, one hears that the general rule is that texts expand in translation. They do not shrink. So what happened here? This is a kind of a selected episodic history or of some translations that I have happened to pick up. Not very generalizable, perhaps, but maybe of some interest in itself. What did I do then? The greatest Hindi critic of the last half century, Namvar Singh, when he saw the English translation by me, he said to me, Harish ji, aapne Amrit Rai ka bada bhari upkar kiya hai. You have done such a great favor to the author of the original by cutting it down so drastically. Can translators do such a favor to the author of the original? Is it advisable? Is it good? So this is one question that I put before you. But let me also exculpate myself from implications of such drastic agency by sharing with you what I've shared with everyone. I wrote a long memoir of Amrit Rai. This last year was his birth centenary year. A journal in Hindi brought out a special issue of 300 pages on him. And I contributed a memoir in which I have explained this in detail. It was he and his wife, who was also a writer. So she was the daughter of Subhadra Kumari Chauhan, of Jhansi Wari Rani fame. Sudha Chauhan was Amrit Rai's wife. Between the two of them, they had cut the text. The text that I translated is not exactly what they cut it to, because they also gave me the freedom to cut further, to merge chapters, to restore some of the things that they had cut if I liked, if I thought they were relevant. So I had that bit of freedom, margin, but the big cuts were done by them. Why would an author cut his own text? We hear of texts that are revised and enhanced and supplemented in subsequent editions. Why would he cut it? The biography was published in 1962 in Hindi. I began translating it in 1980, and it was published in 1982. So 20 years on, about 20 years had passed since the first edition. This biography was very widely noticed and commented on and criticized in the Hindi literary world, mostly acclaimed, but also criticized. And I think Amrit Rai took some of the criticism on board, if not to heart. And that was one of the guiding principles through which he cut. In that, I've explained that elsewhere, he cut a lot of the political background. He cut some of the episodes concerning Premchand. He somehow felt that a trimmer book was needed. And at the same time, he did not cut the Hindi edition, which continues to be reprinted the same as he wrote it originally. There's something to ponder and to consider there. He would do it himself and he would let me do it in English, in a different language. But the cuts that he himself administered in the English version, he would not allow in the Hindi version. I also did some other things. I don't know whether to call it an exercise of interventionist agency, but I changed the name of the hero. It's the biography of Premchand, and I changed the name of the hero. Isn't that drastic? Isn't that interventionist? But that's because Hindi had, at least, I don't know whether it still has, those conventions. Especially Amrit Rai was the son of Premchand, youngest son of Premchand. So somehow, throughout the biography, he never called him Premchand. He called him Munshiji, which is an honorific. It's like wives not naming their husbands in villages. Same kind of deference principle. Amrit Rai, he was 14 years old when his father passed away. So somehow he never got to the stage where he would call Premchand. He did, of course, in public lectures he did. But throughout the biography, he did not call him Premchand. He called him Munshiji. And I thought that just would not work in English. So I changed that. I changed a couple of other things. But I've talked enough about that. Let me talk about exercise of agency that I, as a translator, I've myself tried to exercise, with or without success, in some other things I've translated. One poem comes to mind. This poem is called, in Hindi, is called JNU Mein Hindi. JNU as in the university, and Hindi as in the non-national language of India. JNU Mein Hindi. It's a terrific poem. It's a political poem in the best sense, because it shows that in a citadel of egalitarian and democratic values, such as the JNU, the subaltern has no visibility, at least in this poem. I translated not only this poem, it's by Kedarnath Singh, Gyanpith Award-winning Hindi poet, who taught Hindi in the JNU for 20 or 30 years. So he knew what he was writing about. What was it that I wanted to do as a free agent in translation, and that I failed to do in translating it? JNU Mein Hindi, the title I translated as Hindi in JNU. And I said, no, that's not right. It should not be Hindi in JNU, because the original has JNU Mein Hindi. The second word in such titles carries far greater weight than the first. But how could I say that in English? JNU Mein Hindi, Hindi in JNU, they seem non-negotiable, and they seem to mean the opposite of each other. What can a translator do? A translator, not all the changes that a translator makes are of his choice. Not all the changes and alterations and interventions are a matter of agency, of volition. If we become conscious of this in a big way, I think that also might alter some of the parameters of the debate that we are conducting about the agency of the translator. Another novel that I wish to refer is not a novel, it's a biography I was talking about. A novel that I wish to refer to next is called Ghachar Ghochar. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's one of the biggest successes of Indian literature in translation in recent times. It was published in Kannada in 2013. It was published by Harper here in India in English translation in 2015. And then this doesn't happen to all translations. This is where the exceptional part of the story begins. And 2 years later, it was published in the UK by Faber and in the USA by Penguin. It has got, I think, the best reviews internationally. New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian. It has got the best reviews that I think any work of fiction from India in translation has got, full stop. There was the translation into Hindi as well, and I was there at the launch in Delhi, and it struck me, and I said that a work from an Indian language has not attracted so much positive international attention in translation like Ghachar Ghochar ever since Gitanjali by Tagore. In 100 years' time. I know that I'm saying it out of profound ignorance, and that all of you multilingual people are waiting to kill me for saying it, or at least to cite totally outstanding examples, which should be exceptions to what I've said. So do please tell me, do please let me know what's happened. There's an article, actually, illuminating article by a Swiss or Finnish scholar on the attention that Ghachar Ghochar has received. And look at the title. I mean, Sanskara is nothing compared to this. Rag Darbari is nothing compared to this. Untranslated titles, which have succeeded nevertheless. Ghachar Ghochar is a nonsense word even in Kannada. Is an invented and coined word by the author Vivek Shanbhag, even in Kannada. And it's been retained totally unintelligible until you are well into the book, which is part of the triumph, which is part of the triumph of untranslatability, which is part of the success of how a translation resists intervention and agency by the translator. There are all kinds of examples coming up, all kinds of things here. Now, one thing that I'd like to point out, my own understanding is, and Shivaramji and many other people would know better, so if I'm not correct on this, I'd like to be immediately corrected, is that it is published as a novella in Hindi and English and so on. But in Kannada itself, it came out as one of several pieces of fiction in a book, which had other short stories as well. And they were shorter, and this was the longest. But in translation, it came out separately. Now, this Swedish scholar who has written on this, where is his name? I had it somewhere, Pers Stolberg, I think he's called, Pers Stolberg. He writes in it that, in his article, that Indian books in translation, in English translation, very often move from international awards downwards. It happened so in the case of Gitanjali. One can't think of many other examples. I can't think of many other examples, because the Booker Prizes that have gone to Rushdie and Roy and Adiga and so on, and Kiran Desai, well, they're not works in translation. So this thing happening even to translations, if it happens to Rushdie, one is understandable, more understandable, that it percolates down to us in English language text, even though by an Indian, from the West to India. But is it happening even in the case of works that originated here in an Indian language? Possibly it is. It's something to ponder. And so again, translation is a big part of the mix of questions that we are considering here. Let me move on to the next one, which is a translation called Tomb of Sand of a Hindi novel, Ret Samadhi, by Gitanjali Sri. Let me also display Exhibit A and Exhibit B. These are the two books. The slim one is Hindi, and the fat one is English translation. It might look as if a lot of agency has gone into the English translation to make it 2.5 times the size of the Hindi book. I think the Hindi text runs to 376 pages, and I know that font size and size of the page, setting, all these are different, but not that different. 376 in Hindi, 732 in English. How does it happen? I showed you an example of that biography that I translated, which had shrunk by that much. This is the one that's bloated up, that's expanded by that much. What's been going on here? Well, it's very simple. It's the way the chapters are laid out. There are lots of very short sections or chapters, and each one of them is given a full page in the translation, followed by a blank page, followed sometimes by another blank page, and then the next section begins, and sometimes it concludes on the same page. So there is a lot of bloating, actually. It's not expansion. It's just typological and format bloating. So it's a non-issue. This is the this is the text on which I find that in the book of extracts, on page 59, there is a paper. Rohit Saha, independent scholar from North Bengal, from Darjeeling or Siliguri, or where is Rohit Saha here? Maybe yes, maybe no. And he talks about the strange case of this book. And he picks up, one of the most interesting things in this translation. I must perhaps declare that of the people that of the texts that I've been talking about and the translators, I do know many of them. So, but let not that come in the way of my saying what I do. Daisy Rockwell is the translator, an American. And one of the most interesting things in this huge translation is what she says right at the end in her translator's note. It's only 1.5 pages. And it says many things which Rohit Saha points out too about sound translation. There are many sound effects in the Hindi original. Rohit Saha picks that up. And he quotes Daisy Rockwell in this note as saying that she tried to recreate the text as an English dhwani of Hindi. Daisy Rockwell knows Hindi. She has a PhD in Hindi literature from the University of Chicago, which is where I met her about 25 years ago. But this sentence does not sound right to me. To recreate the text as an English dhwani of Hindi. I would have said pratidhwani. But what she's trying to do is to invoke dhwani as an aesthetic concept as well, which is treading on very slippery ground. Because dhwani as in dhvanyaloka is extremely hard to grasp, and it's not the sound effect of a text either in Hindi or English. That's the last thing that dhwani is. One thing that happens, not in this translation, but in the discourse that has been generated. Why is this book noticeable? Because it is the first book from India that has been longlisted and after that shortlisted for the International Booker Prize. The International Booker is not the same as the Booker that Salman Rushdie won, but it has the same name. It comes from the same trust, from the same donors. It shares the same aura. 2 Indians or subcontinental writers were nominated for it before, Intizar Hussain and Anantamurthy, but that was when it was not given to a single text. The rules changed since then. So it's the first for that in translation. One of the things that has happened immediately on translation, and I'm pointing out the least actually, is that Gitanjali has become Shri. Her name is Gitanjali Shri, but in all the international reviews, in all the English language articles on it in India, which are already appearing, she's called Shri. I wrote something, the magazine Outlook asked me to write something on it a couple of weeks ago, and I wrote Gitanjali and they made it Shri. So she's got a new name. She's going to be Shri, not Gitanjali anymore. At least when people refer to her in this kind of a discourse, that's one of the things that happened. Another thing that's happened is Daisy Rockwell has said that she has left a lot of Hindi words untranslated in her text. And she says, but in the Hindi text too, there are a lot of English words. It's packed with English words, she says, which is an exaggeration, gross exaggeration, I might say. But that's what she uses as justifying her practice. In fact, at one point, she even says, if you don't know what it means, the Hindi that I have not translated, go and look it up on Google. Now, that's a new translator's strategy. But the most important thing that she says in her short translator's note is that her translation, the language in her translation, is artificially English-centered, just as the original Hindi text was artificially Hindi-centered. This needs to be unpacked very carefully, and I'm sorry I have not left any time for unpacking it myself. But what I might indicate is my own line of inquiry regarding this. I think she's saying that languages are getting to be more mixed, languages like Hindi and English, and therefore more similar. Now, one slight thing that I wish to point out, another thing that happened as soon as this novel in translation was longlisted for the International Booker, something very interesting happened in Delhi. The Hindi publisher threw a very grand party. I really love that. The English translation, longlisted at that stage for a prize in London, is having repercussions in Delhi in Hindi to the extent that the publisher Rajkamal threw a really grand party. And there were some speakers who were all asked to speak for 4 minutes each. But this is India. Nobody spoke for 4 minutes except one speaker out of the 5. I was one of them, but not the 4-minute one. You can guess. So what are we celebrating in Hindi? How will it play out in market terms? Will the shortlisting there now result in much bigger sales of the Hindi book in the Hindi world? It may, of course, also promote sales and rights. And so in terms of translation into other Indian languages, is it again the seep down effect from an international recognition? And look at what happens on the 26th of May, when the winner will be announced. We're all agog in Hindi and looking forward to it. So finally, what I'd say, this point about how the Hindi is artificially Hindi-centered in Gitanjali's text, and the English in Daisy Rockwell's text in translation is artificially English-centered. This seems to me the most thought-provoking, or simply the most provocative statement of all in relation to the translation the whole business of translation going on between Indian languages in the year 2021-22 and the state of English. Are we finally going to have the 2 Booker Prizes merged into one because the 2 languages might have become more or less one? Is that what Daisy Rockwell projecting? Where will be translation then? What will happen to it? Will it be an extinct practice? These are some of the things to think about. I've taken longer than you expected, and longer, I think, even than I expected, but that's not unprecedented. Shivaram is still not 9:30 p.m., but I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an informative session. May I please request Professor Padikkal to lead the conversation now?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Trivedi, for that fascinating lecture. And I don't want to summarize, Professor. I open the his lecture for questions, suggestions, and any debate. It's open for the house.
Can I speak, sir? Can I say something?
Yeah.
Sir, it's such a pleasure to listen to Professor Harish Trivedi. as usual. I may say, even while reading all his articles or books, I feel he's sitting there and explaining it to us. That is the style he adapts. Thank you, sir, for bringing in various aspects related to translation, which we don't know. Because of your experience, world experience, experience with the various authors and translators, you could bring in so many things which we may not find in any book. You are an encyclopedia of knowledge related to translation studies. Sir, I would like to bring to your notice one or two things related to your points to endorse what you have said. How sometimes we leave the titles untranslated in English. The classic example is Bama's Karuku. I don't know what it means. Lakshmi Armstrong retained it as it is. For Sangati, she says events as a subtitle, but the Karuku, there's no title at all. There's no subtitle at all. But it became popular. So in that context, like how translation is another point. Improvising act, whether they translators improvise the source text or not, or go for selective representation, as you were saying in some instances where they choose, they give a kind of representation to the source text. But apart from that, sometimes certain texts, when they remain in regional languages, they will never become popular because they get confined to that particular language. They don't reach other linguistic communities. But once a translation is available in English, they get recognition. It happened in the case of some Telugu novels by Dalit writers. Even in the case of Karuku Bama, had it been, if it was not translated into English, we wouldn't have known about Bama. So in that sense, really translators do a wonderful job. They bring they give a new lease of life to these translations, make them available in English. And once something is available in English, it can easily be translated into other Indian languages through indirect translation. So that's how translators always do a service to their source text. So it's in terms of the material things, whether they improvise in the text itself by adapting certain means, deliberately to improvise or not, that's a different thing. But they do a great service to popularize and familiarize their source writers far and wide, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lakshmi. About Bama and the untranslated title, untranslated title, according to common sense, should not be acceptable because they defeat comprehension. The first requirement of any text, even a title in the original and particularly in translation, is to be intelligible. They fail that test, and yet we have known over and over again that they perhaps carry an aura of exoticism or otherness, at least. And sometimes it flies and sometimes it doesn't. There are no rules about it. There's no predictability. But all that you and I can do is to watch what's happening and to try and draw inferences and see. The other point that you made that I wish to respond to, you made several, but the one that I wish to respond to is how translation into English performs a service, because then it makes the text visible in a pan-Indian way, and then other languages can also have that text translated from the English version into themselves. Now, suppose a Telugu text is translated into Hindi or vice versa, or similarly Marathi Telugu, Marathi Hindi, Bengali Marathi. There is a huge or quite considerable word stock that often remains the same.
Yeah.
And the connotations remain the same. They do not have to be mediated through an entirely foreign language which does not share any of our dhwani in spite of what Daisy Rockwell says. So what then happens is that the text, which becomes an alien text to a large extent, through translation into English, is made doubly and triply alien when it goes into other Indian languages. Because all those things are replicated, all the departures or deviations are replicated, and some more are added, because there is perhaps an element of incomprehension in the English text, which the new translator faces and has to cope with somehow. So it's a game of Chinese whispers, translating
Yes,
an Indian text
yes.
from an English translation further. Lots of us have been concerned about it. One doesn't know what the solution is, and yet one knows what the problem is.
Yes,
And
sir.
the problem is not small; it's huge.
Yes, sir. Under agency, can we also consider the role of the publishers? Like you were talking about the Delhi, the publisher organizing a party and all. So publishers go to any length to promote their publications, whether they are translations or original writings. So publisher as an agency also has a major role to play in popularizing a particular text. Isn't it true, sir?
When you say we'll go to any length, you sound slightly disapproving.
No, sir. No, positive, only point. It has no negative connotation.
The author and the translator also go to any length to produce a good book. No? But yes, what the difference between an author and a translator on the one hand and a publisher on the other is that a publisher has actually invested money, and a fair amount of money. So market forces come into it. If a publisher loses money on, say, 10 books in a row, it's like Bollywood.
Yes.
Then the publisher may not be able to continue in the same way for any length of time. So we have to recognize that that without a publisher, we would not know about books. If a book is not published, it's as good as not being written. So yes, you're very right. There is a combination of factors, and we people in the universities, we are so high-minded that we don't even, we look at the money we get, but we don't want to look at the money that's involved in publishing and royalty payment and so on, as if it were beneath our notice, if not contempt. But yeah, money makes the world go round in so many ways. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right.
Yeah, I invite any other questions.
Well, there are two. Yeah, there are two hands up, Shivaram.
Yeah.
There is Usha and there is Nina that I can see.
Yeah, Usha and Veena, please ask your questions.
Very good afternoon to everyone.
Nina, one second. I'm sorry.
Sure, ma'am, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I had actually raised my hand much before you did, so I'm not jumping the queue, right? Good afternoon, sir, and it's a pleasure to meet you again after a very long time. And
hello, Usha. Hello, Usha. Likewise, pleasure to see you too. Yeah.
And in this virtual medium, it's very unusual and strange to have these conferences in virtual medium, but all of us are getting used to it. I was, when you were talking about Ghachar Gochar, the first thing that I thought was, I have read the book in translation. I don't know Kannada, and there are many good Kannada translators sitting here today. So I will not be able to say anything at all about the Kannada part of it, but when I heard the title Ghachar Gochar, I immediately understood what it meant. I don't know how that happened, but I immediately understood that there is a talk about some messy situation.
Usha, that must be a mystical non-translators agency.
So but I'm not arguing for not translating the titles at all. I am thinking in terms of these translations of titles and the agency of the translator, which is what I would like you to elaborate a little upon, because I had also read Sobha Shakti, the Sri Lankan writer's book in translation, and it's in translation called Terrorist. And the translator wrote a longish note in which she explains why Sobha Shakti's original title of the original title is just the sound uh, and it's written exactly as if it would be said by a South Indian without the aspiration. It's not it's M and M. And that
No, we can't hear you. I think you got into a freeze.
Yeah, we lost her. I think some problem, maybe with the internet.
Nina, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Professor Trivedi's connection has got disconnected or something of the sort.
No, you got disconnected.
Yeah. So should I repeat the little bit about?
Yeah.
So this thing about when the translator is displaying a sort of radical agency by translating into terrorist is I mean, to me it felt limiting, right? So I was therefore wondering if you could speak a little about this business of translator and agency, and how much is okay and how much is not okay.
What I'd say very briefly is that if translators have radical agency like you describing, perhaps they can also become terrorists. It's radical agency is slightly daunting as a concept. But what I'd say is these are questions that are not answerable really, so far as I can see. There are different practices. Some of them work in some cases, the same practice, and in other cases they doesn't. I'm sure many translators have tried retaining the original title and the publisher has said no. So there are many stages through which a translation proceeds or is processed. And I don't think there is any kind of a position that's generalizable here. One can only say, as I tried to say, that untranslated titles are more challenging to the reader. They are perhaps a sense of otherness, a sense of exotica, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Yeah, Nina ji.
Very good afternoon to everyone. And Trivedi sir, this is the third time I have heard you speak, once very long ago at JNU and another time quite recently. And every time you make statements that make me think again and again about why I translate and how I translate. So I would like to really thank you for that. And I just had a thought that maybe you could expand upon. That first of all, I really like the way that you spoke of the translation as an act of submission, which I agree with in a sense, and also as the translator as well as the writer being invisible in the sense that you use the word during your talk. And that brought me to the concluding remarks that you made about Daisy Rockwell's statement, and it led me to just wonder, this is just a nascent idea in my mind right now in the past half an hour, that maybe in this world where right now translation activity has been increasing exponentially across different media and is visible in ways in which it was never before in the form of subtitling, etc. But at the same time, I feel just as Vanuti uses the word translators invisibility, can we now talk of translations invisibility, the process, or let us say translation as a science, as a skill, as an art, or as a practice that is somehow becoming invisible? We take it for granted. Like, I know people who say that, yes, I translate, but I know nothing about translation. So statements of such, just as the way we have something like, oh, I am a womanist, I'm not a feminist. So in the same way, I feel that a certain kind of trend where translation is becoming invisible, I can feel it around me. So am I wrong to think so? What would your thoughts be on this matter?
The first thought that strikes me is that I should write a mail to my friend Larry Venuti and tell him what you said. That not only the translator is becoming invisible again, but the very act of translation is becoming invisible. You know, it comes to us in such seemingly natural ways. I mean, who thinks that subtitles in a movie are translation? They're just subtitles. They're given. Sometimes one reads them, sometimes one just looks at the visuals and one goes along. So yes, there is so much translation. And at the same time, the field of translation is shrinking in another context because English is spreading and is everywhere. So there is this tug of war between these two opposing forces. And as observers, cultural observers, we can only watch as closely, as analytically as possible as to where things are going. But you are very observant about all the points that you made. And this one particularly, the last one particularly, that we are taking so much translation for granted to be around us, to surround sound, this translation. And in other fields, not literary translation, not academic translation, but in other areas of life which are beyond books particularly, intermediate translation, we are perhaps more accustomed to it, less conscious of it than we realize. Yes, it's a good point. Yeah. We have two more hands.
Yeah, Pragya Singh and DTS.
DTS. Who's Shivaram? Who's DTS-EFLU? Is it a human
DTS
being?
is organizer. Some
I see.
from organizers.
Tarakeshwar. It is Tarakeshwar.
So they want us to stop.
Yeah, no. Yeah. First, Pragya, please ask your question, and then Tarakeshwar. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much, sir. Hi, sir. Hi, Professor Trivedi, sir. Seeing you after so long. I am happy to share with you that I have joined the Translation Studies Department in IFLU. And I think I should have shared with you this before, but I'm happy to share here at this platform. Sir, my question to you is that I have been reading about basically about how Walter Benjamin debunks the theory of communication through translation. You know, translation is not an act of communication, but it contains the message in itself, the meaning in itself, and it is not something which it is passing on. It's just a mode. So what one keeps in mind in such a scenario, what one keeps in mind when someone is translating? So you don't keep an audience in the mind, you don't keep a reader in mind, you don't think that it is leading to some sort of a service to any text, be it the translated text or the or the target or source text, whichever text. Okay, so what does one keep in mind? Like how do you process it? What do you keep in mind when you translate? If you don't keep a reader in mind, or if you don't keep a or an audience in mind, then and when the translation ceases to be a mode of communication, then what is it exactly?
Pragya, are you in your first year of research?
Yes, sir.
So a very important thing you have already done. You have read Benjamin.
Okay.
Now forget Benjamin and move on. The great thing about Benjamin is he's one Marxist I know who speaks like a mystic.
Yeah, that's
The
true.
statement that you're talking about, and the joke is, are you reading him in Harry Zone's translation?
Yes, yeah.
Right. Now that translation has been shown to be extremely inadequate and erroneous.
Okay.
Now there are two other translations of the same text. So try those and see if they are any more helpful. In any case, Walter Benjamin is just one of the many voices. I think his contribution lies not in that one essay that we read in translation studies. His contribution lies elsewhere, I feel. Derrida also said all kinds of things which can only be called mystical.
Mm-hmm.
Now that he is past his peak, we can say these irreverent things about him with impunity. There are lots of things in Derrida that don't begin to make common sense.
Okay.
But the test is, you will read lots of theorists.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to carry all of them with you right through.
Yeah.
Some will be more helpful, some will not. And pick your way through them. Don't be daunted by them. Don't be oppressed by them.
Okay.
Right, Pragya?
Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Tarakeshwar.
Thank you, sir. The discussion is, we are towards the translator. I think in the last 2-3 days also, even others pointed it out. When we talk about the visibility of the translator, everyone agrees that there is visibility. And remuneration, of course, as Harish said, should be there for the translator too. Whether it is 2/3 or awards for them. But the question is about not so much about the visibility. Visibility that comes through the agency. Whether that should be there or not is the, I think, contentious issue. Many are uncomfortable with translators asserting their agency because of translation, we are expecting that I'm in Tagu, not somebody who is into Kannada. So, because it belies my expectation of if there is somebody else in between Tagore. You can't completely make them non-visible in terms of agency. So we don't know what agency is there. As a reader, I can't assess. And as a translation studies scholar, I can't dictate not to a reader how they should read, what they should expect. Or I can't dictate terms. You should not assert your agency, or you should assert your agency. So as a okay, I think he got logged out.
Yeah.
Welcome back, sir. Okay. So as a translation studies scholars, we look at where the agency is asserted. What are the reasons for the assertion of the agency? So that is more important to us than trying to see whether there should be agency or not. Who are we? The translations have happened from several years, several centuries. You only look at how the translations have happened, whether there is agency or not, whether there is visibility or not. So we need to move away from this prescriptive framework of whether it should be there or not. We can't decide sitting in conference of 4 days and say there should be agency or there should not be agency. So we need to look at where the agencies are asserted, why they are asserted, and what are the implications of it. So I think that is a more fruitful way of handling things as translation studies scholars. But as a critic, as a lover of literature, as a reader of literature, trying to read literature in other languages through translation, my expectations could be different. So I'm only trying to say that we should not conflate the expectations of a critic as a reader or even the author with that of the translation studies scholars. So I think this is my humble submission. Thank you.
Hello, Professor Trivedi, are you there? Hello. Hello. Hello.
Harish Trivedi is back, sir.
Huh? Ilva?
He's back.
His name is appear.
Yeah,
Yes, he is
yeah,
back.
Professor Trivedi. Yeah.
I'm very sorry, but this happens in Delhi. I hope it happens in Hyderabad as well.
Yeah,
Occasionally we have a power break.
yeah.
No, I think we've gone on for long enough. But if there are, oh, that's my phone. Yeah. I was trying to get through on the phone, but let me switch that off. Yeah. So I think we've had fairly long discussion. But if you'd like to carry on with that, sure, I'm here. I'm back here. Shivaram,
Tarakeshwar, do you want to make a very brief question? Very brief. Yeah, whatever you said earlier. Yeah.
Okay. This is about our expectations of the translation. So as a critic, as a reader of literature, we do have certain expectations from the translation. And we expect the translator to adhere to those expectations. That is one thing. As a reader, when I'm reading Tagore, I expect to read Tagore, but not somebody who is translating Tagore into Kannada. So that is fine. As a critic who wants to read literature in other languages, to know those authors, that is my expectation. I want the translator to adhere to that expectation. But as a translation studies scholar, I can't have the same expectations, nor I dictate them to the translators. So whatever the translations have happened already. So if they, why this assertion of agency is happening? And then whether it's a conscious assertion of agency or is it unconscious? Or sometimes it could be simply a claim that I've asserted agency. Sometimes I've asserted the agency and say that I've asserted myself to the original author without being there. So all kinds of claims could be there. And as study scholars, when we look at it, our methodological apparatus, what we look at as agencies is entirely different things. So one is to have expectations as reader. Another thing is to approach it as a translation studies scholar. When and how agency comes, the implications of it, I think is another thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. Yeah, Professor Trivedi.
Tarakeshwar, you told me earlier that you had not chosen the title of the conference. And now, through your question, you have demonstrated that you did not write the concept note. This is wonderful.
I am a party to it as a department.
Yeah,
I am a party to it. No, it was not my word. I still started.
You're being very democratic. You're being very honorable, but your question stands. Now tell me, Tarakeshwar, I also worry about these things. Yes, of course, we have certain expectations of the translator. And what is implied there is that the translator, well, we are not saying it, but we're implying it very loudly and clearly, that the translator will give us what the original text has, faithfully. That is the implication of the expectations that we have of a translator, that he will not go off on his own and try to pass off his artistry as the original author's artistry. But this is correct, I think. At the same time, as a reader who does not know the original language, what means do we have of verifying that our expectations are fulfilled? That is where the translator can exploit the agency as she wishes. It's a double bind. You know, the ideal reader of a translator is somebody who does not know the original. It's not academics and reviewers. and they would never know.
No, but outside of literature, for example, I was looking at a 120 years old Ayurvedic text translated from Malayalam into Kannada. So this Kannada translator of this Ayurvedic text, he adds so many things into it, because some of the herbs that are mentioned in that Malayalam text are not available here. He says what could be substituted. So precisely your topic, translation as improvement. So making it more viable to the readers. So in that sense, the agency of the translator is appreciated in translating that Ayurvedic text from Malayalam into Kannada.
Now that's a very interesting example, Tarkeshwar. But has this translator actually tried out those replacement herbs, or are they going to be fatal to some new patients?
That I don't know.
Because then in a medical text, translation becomes an extremely responsible act. Let me tell you, later this month or early next month, a history of world literature is coming out in 4 volumes. I'm also a contributor to it. It'll be published by Wiley-Blackwell, New York. Wiley-Blackwell also publish a lot of technical texts. Perhaps that is half their market. And some of them are medical texts. So on the verso of the title page, the copyright page as it's called, in the first proof of our book, it had a long paragraph of disclaimer from the publisher. And one of the lines in it was, do not take anything recommended in this book without first consulting your doctor. Now, for a history of world literature, I think that's a very, very necessary precaution. Ajay now?
Sir, yes. Hello, sir. Hello, Professor Trivedi.
Hello.
Sir, I was about to ask the same question. You just talked about the history of world literature. I read it elsewhere recently. And I'm wondering, I think you are you took the in charge of South Asian literature, maybe, if I'm right. Yeah. So my question is, how are you going to deal this entire, large this category of South Asian literature? Because there may be omissions, there may be omission of literary traditions, many literary movements, so on and so languages. So I'm very curious, how are you going to include so many things under this term world literature?
Ajay, what do you do?
Sir, I'm pursuing MA in comparative literature in Central University of Hyderabad.
The first thing I'll say to you is that when you read this history of world literature, please consult your doctor first. Because, you're very right. I mean, the kind of question that you're asking is the question that every reader and non-reader will ask. How can you write a history of world literature? The mind boggles. It seems an impossible project. It seems a totally inadvisable project. Nobody should even try. That's what it seems to be. But, a project has been undertaken. Let us say that this project, the value of this project lies in the fact that it gives everyone an opportunity to knock it down. It's not been done before in English. It has been done before in many of the European languages, a history of world literature. In fact, I'm responsible, as an editor, I'm responsible not only for South Asia, but also for Southeast Asia and the Pacific. So, which means Australia, New Zealand, and the islands over there. There are 6 editors, and it's a large world. But you're very right. What I've written myself is South Asia. And the South Asia part that I have written by myself, I tried to find co-authors. I contacted many people. I will not name them. It's not fair to them. And they all said no, because they were much wiser than I am. To say no at the beginning is far better than making a fool of yourself having done it. So that encouraged me somehow perversely to go ahead and do it. I know only one language properly. 2 Indian languages I know fairly well. I know 2 others to some extent, and that's it. And it's not only India, it's South Asia. There are lots of languages in Punjab, in Pakistan. There are languages in Sri Lanka, Sinhala particularly, and Tamil, Nepal. So how can anyone take it on? How can anyone do it? Now, that is a rhetorical question. The real question is, please read and then tell me how I've done. That is the proof of the pudding. You will find, Shishir Kumar Das, the great historian of Indian literature, he was a dear friend of mine. He was a neighbor on the university campus. He used to say to me that even the greatest Indian scholars and writers, old friends of his, would come to him and say, "Das Sahab, wonderful history, great history. No one could have done it, but you have given Kannada very few pages." Or if the writer was Tamil, he would say, "Tamil is hardly there. What have you done?" So that is the first criterion by which people judge histories. But there may be, after one gets over that disappointment, there may be other things. There are 2 ways of judging a history or any text, anthology and history particularly. What is not in it? Everybody seizes upon that. But you can also look at what is there and perhaps arrive at some kind of a balance. But I look forward to it. I don't know who will read it in India, because let me break all your hearts. It's a 4-volume publication, and the price is going to be $700. Tarkeshwar, has EFLU enough funds? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sir, with the last question on the chat box, maybe we will conclude. This is a question by Ashit Kumar Biswal. He has said, "Sir, you have spoke about translation as an act of submission, which requires humility on the part of translator, and also as an act of intervention with respect to Spivak. Aren't the 2 contradictory? Doesn't intervention overrule humility and the openness to the text? Also, can you please talk about ethics in the practice of translation?" This is the question, and I think with this question we will conclude. Yeah, sir.
Well, yes, of course. Of course, the 2 positions are contradictory, or at least they are not compatible. But I did not say both of them. One was a quotation. In fact, both were quotations. Okay. What I'm trying to offer you is a collation of several views. My own practice veers towards one pole rather than the other. My own inclination, even as a reader, not as a translator, even as a reader or critic, may favor one of these polar positions more than the other. But the whole point of my talking about these is to put forward both of these and to ask you, all of you individually, to arbitrate between them, to negotiate them. I do not see as the job of a lecturer to tell you which is better than which other. It works out very differently. There's no one truth. There's no one true practice. So, yes, and I will also say this. It sounds paradoxical, not contradictory. That's the first thing that I talked about. It may sound paradoxical. Those who are in love exercise the greatest agency. Sometimes they feel that the fact that they are in love with the text gives them total license. Their love is not submissive. Their love makes impossible claims. It's not only love of a text, It's also love of anything or anyone. We know that. Love seems to privilege the person who claims to love and grant special rights, or so it seems. So it's not, I mean, even submission, if Gayatri Spivak talks about submission, then we have to think again. She has a number of strongly interventionist positions alongside that one statement. So they're not easy to combine. They're not easy to practice one at the expense of the other. As about the ethical, the word ethical, yes. Is it ethical to alter the text, or is it ethical not to alter the text? Is it ethical to alter the text when you feel that is totally politically incorrect and offensive? Or is it also ethical to alter the text where you feel that it is artistically inadequate and that you can improve it, that you can enhance it? The question of ethics is not entirely an objective question. The question of ethics is how you perceive the ethical question to stand, to relate to you. It's not as if everyone can have their own ethics. That would be draining the word ethics of all meaning. There are certain universal values and parameters. But everyone, almost everyone, who acts in whatever way possible think that they're being ethical. That too goes, there's a justification for everything people think. That's why they do it. So if we are going to observe certain universal ethical values, then there's a lot of negotiation to be made. Then there is a lot of submission that will be called into the question.
Okay, thank you. There are two more hands, so we will go with that. Mr. Taresh and then Kokila. Please be brief. I request you to be brief. And Taresh.
Thank you, sir. Sir, in translation studies, we talk a lot about agency of the translator. So when it comes to the process of translation, we all know that there are other agents too who are involved in shaping the translation. So this is with reference to my MPhil work, which I've done in University of Hyderabad, in which I talked about language editors. So when I presented it, when I put forth my proposal in front of the scholars there, one of the scholars responded that where is translation in it? So is language editing of these of the translations is something that we can talk about within the framework of translation studies, or is it something that is disconcerting to the translation studies and the scholars?
Tarish, who asked you where is translation in it? Your supervisor?
No. It was somebody else. I can't take the name, sorry.
Don't tell me the name. All names are the same to me. So don't take the name. But look, we have talked about this before. Publishers have their agency. The copy editor has agency. And so-called language editor. You know, the first time I heard this phrase, I was most amused. But that's because your chief editor at the publishing house does not know your language. So there is somebody called a language editor. But whatever the language editor suggests can be overruled by the chief editor. The language editor does not have the final say, from what I've seen of these practices. I'll give you one example of editing, not by the language editor, but by somebody at the publisher's end. This is one of the most successful translations from Hindi into English. It is Rag Darbari. We held a conference in translation in the 1990s, late 1990s, at the British Council in New Delhi. And we invited the translator. When I say we, I was one of the co-conveners, the other person being the boss of the British Council. I mean, I did not do anything except choose the names of the invitees, and they did not do anything except pick up the bill and provide the venue. So it was a happy arrangement. Now, we invited the translator. The translator is Gillian Wright, English woman, long resident in India, with a degree in Hindi and Urdu from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, but long resident in India, in Delhi. We invited the author, Srilal Shukla, and then a student of translation of mine from Delhi University read out a paper on the translation. She pointed out several passages from the Hindi original that were missing. Several seemingly important, significant passages that were missing in the translation. And we were all waiting as to what the translator would say in reply, because she had to respond to it. Gillian Wright, old friend of mine. Now, the suspense was killing because example after example seemed to be very damaging. And then she told us that she had translated the whole novel without leaving out a single word. But the publisher says we have to cut it by 70 pages, 70. She said, she laughed and told my student who read out the paper, she said, you have pointed out very few examples of what's not in the English translation. Let me point out some more. Why did the publisher then say we have to cut so many pages? Because the price had to be brought down to what was then seen to be the psychological threshold, which was 99 rupees. Let it not go into three figures. The economy of production then dictated that the novel should only be this long. So what the language editor does is nothing compared to these much more drastic decisions that are also undertaken all the time. There is also people talk about agency. Let them think about, as you said, Arish, let them think about other agents. There is a breed that is increasing, expanding very fast in India. It was always there in the West, called the literary agent. The literary agent truly has agency. That's why it's called agent. Now, what kind of agency does he have? He pushes an author and he pushes the translator to many publishers as strongly and as commercially as possible. Did Daisy Rockwell want to translate this novel in particular, Red Samadhi? No. She had probably not even heard of it. She has translated 4 or 5 books from Hindi before. Now she was looking for a new book to translate. A literary agent was looking for a translator who could translate this book. It's like a Jyotishi matchmaking. So those are the kind of forces that are operating in the literary world. And we don't want to know about them. We only talk about fidelity and ethics of the translator. There is fidelity and ethics involved at every step of the production line. There are many kinds of factors that come into play. And we have to live in this world, as we all know. Otherwise, there'll be no translation. There'll be no text, no translation. What will you do? So it's a very complicated case, Tarish. And yes, the language editor, so-called, has a role to play. We are much better off when we have a language editor than when we don't. Right?
What about Daniel Wisbords, sir?
Daniel
Wisbords.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have read the afterward that you have written to the book Survival, an Experience and an Experiment in Translation Modern.
Who's this?
Poetry.
Who's this speaking?
I'm Tarish.
Tarish. Yeah. Tarish, what have you not read? If you read even that, you are a very well-read young man. Yeah. You were saying something about it? No.
No, sir. I was just passing remarks.
If you want to say something about it, do write an email to me.
Sure, sir. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Kokila, the last question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. This is Dr. Kokila from Translation Studies Department, IFLU. So it has been, I should say, a great treat for us to listen to you. We have been longing actually to have invite you, and it is a dream come true for us. We were wondering, actually, I was wondering, what about the translatability of texts like Banbhatta ki Atmakatha and Anamdas ka Potha? What could you say that? And another thing is, like, are you trying to say that in contrast to invisibility of translator, are you trying to, I mean, we also think so, that then we say that we have lots of visibility of translators, right? So these are the 2 points which I would like to,
Let me speak about the second one first. As you can see, I'm a little divided between the visibility of the translator and the invisibility. But on the whole, I favor invisibility within the text and great visibility outside the text. That's the position that I have arrived at. It may be further modified. I hope I'm not brain dead yet, that I will learn a few more things. As I go along, I will read more, I will think more. But that's my position right now. So visibility of one kind, invisibility of another kind. And as someone picked up, I think that the original writer is also equally invisible. So a translator should not feel deprived or inferior. Nowadays, everybody has an identity and everybody has a constituency to which they speak. But 2 constituencies and 2 identities can only clash if they have opposite interests. We also need to bear in mind that they have to be reconciled for the world to go on. Therefore, I would not advocate an extreme position on these matters. About Banbhatta ki Atmakatha and Anamdas ka Potha, Kokilaji, what is your mother tongue?
mother tongue is Marathi, but but I have done my done my PhD, MA PhD in Hindi.
Sorry, that actually our bhada.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So my mother tongue is Marathi, but I have done my MA and PhD in Hindi. So yes, since you mentioned Rag Darbari, and we have also studied your article on Rubaiyat and all. So like Madhushala, Madhubala and all those kind of things. So I was interested about that.
Well, I'm amongst very well-read people. But about Banbhatta ki Atmakatha, the difficulty there, it seems to me, is not occasional Sanskritic phrases. I'm sure that Marathi has even more of them. Hindi is projected as being more and more Sanskritized and blamed for it. But my own sense is that Bengali, Marathi, Kannada, and possibly Malayalam are far more Sanskritic than Hindi. And not a bad thing either. One can go into that, but anything that one says offhand will be only problematic, will only bring trouble. But I think we need to rethink that. I think that Hindi's closest relationship has not been with Urdu. The closest relationship of Hindi with other languages needs to be looked at, other Indian languages. So with Banbhatta ki Atmakatha and Anamdas ka Potha, these are, for people who do not know about them, these are novels by a scholar in Hindi, Hajari Prasad Dwivedi, who was a Sanskritist basically, but who taught Hindi, and whose Banabhatta Ki Atmakatha is regarded by Nambar Singh at least as probably the most original Hindi novel ever written. But Nambar Singh is biased because he was, as we say, a direct student of Hajari Prasad. As it happens, right now I'm writing on Dusri Parampara Ki Khoj. It's just been translated into English, and I'm writing the foreword to that book. Banabhatta Ki Atmakatha presents no particular problems for translation into English. Do you mean into English? Translation into English? You're muted.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. Okay. You know, the Sanskritic texture is not a problem, because Persianized texture is equally a problem. All literary texts are subtle in their use of language. All literary texts have a wide range of vocabulary. So that's never a problem. What is the problem, I think, in that text or a text like that is the deep historical, cultural background. Now, how does one bring that out? That's the major question. Without a lot of annotation, without writing a mini book as the forward or the afterword or in the notes. I've just come across a translation in which the text is very, very small, and the original text is printed, and the English translation is printed, and even then they form only about 1/4 of the whole book. The rest is introduction and annotation. Is published from, is done in the University of Chicago by Ulrika Stark and by a student of mine in St. Stephen's College, Smita Gandotra. They want it to be used, obviously, as a textbook in American universities, not only as a literary text, but as a language teaching text. Hence all this annotation. Not many publishers would do that. Not many publishers would let you add more than the length of the original plus the translation as annotation. Ramanujan got close to it, but nobody else. He could do what he wanted. He had that kind of reputation. So the problem is, Banabhatta Ki Atmakatha in English, the problem begins with Banabhat. Who was Banabhat? In the Indian languages, anyone who asks that is a fool. In the English language, anybody who asks that is a genius. So how do we reconcile these things? That is one problem. But let's go ahead regardless. If you wish to do that, go ahead and pick on a certain minimum amount of annotation or explicitation, as is called in translation studies. Yeah. Go ahead anyhow and do it. It's not been done.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Harish Trivedi, for that extremely wonderful session, as usual. Okay, there's nothing special about it. Whenever you speak like that. And I also thank all the all those people who have asked questions, and Professor Trivedi was very happy to answer those questions in a very relaxed fashion in detail. And I thank all of them for making this session very lively. And I thank the organizers of this seminar, Tarakeshwar and his team, and Kokila and Lakshmi, for organizing this seminar and giving me an opportunity to chair this wonderful session. Over to the organizers. Thank you.
On behalf of the Department of Translation Studies, I once again thank the erudite scholars, Professor Harish Trivedi and Professor Padikkal, for sharing their immense knowledge and making the session a truly engaging one. Now, may I please request the participants of the seminar to stay back. An open session would be there, wherein we invite your feedback, suggestion, comments based on the 4 days of deliberation. Over to you, Tarakeshwar sir.
Yeah.
Tarkeshwar.
I think
yes, sir.
Chandrika, you have not thanked Professor Harish Trivedi.
No, it's okay. Many people have thanked me. No, that's not the problem. All I wanted to say was, may I thank all of you? Because it's been such a wonderful session. It's been utterly wonderful. And if you don't mind, Tarkeshwar, may I stay on for the open session?
Sir.
Yeah.
You are most welcome to.
Tarkeshwar?
It is open session. You're open to stay.
Is open to everybody, including me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll stay on. I'll go and get another glass of water, and I'd love to spend some time when I'm not speaking.
Sure.
Thank you. Yes.
Does anyone want to go ahead and share their experience of the 4 days?
Yeah, Tarakeshwar, I would like to speak on this seminar.
Go ahead, Nisha.
Yeah, I'll just stop my video because the internet connectivity is very bad over here. These 4 days of translation seminar was a treat for all of us because the resource persons and the papers were wonderful. It really raised some thought-provoking questions and some controversies regarding translation. Professor Sherry Simon's lecture on translation and gender and the idea of translatress in history of English really, brought in some questions on gender and translation. And of course, the papers also were very good. Your selection of the papers and positioning them into different genres and parts was very good. Especially, I loved the session on children's literature and translation. And also one paper was on illness and medical humanities. One Snigdha from IIT Roorkee, she spoke about illness and how in medical humanities that's translated from the humanistic point of view. That paper really was good. And as a student of comparative literature, I was very much interested in Katha Sarit Sagara and its, after effects like the sources of Haivadana and the Telugu short story, which Dr. Samatha from Telangana University had translated and given the paper presentation. It was about the transposed heads in Haivadana and how even in this Telugu translated story, it was beautifully described. So look at the ramifications from Katha Sarit Sagara to Haivadana to transposed heads to this particular Telugu short story. I think it was called as a Cupid's Bro, something like that. And of course, it was really fun listening to Professor G.J.V. Prasad on discovering India through translation. And another controversy was Professor Velcher Narayan Rao's lecture. He translated a number of Telugu poems into English, and he gave this statement that, poetry cannot be translated. Of course, I was reminded of Robert Frost when he described poetry as what gets lost in translation. So these controversies really make us think, understand, and know about the politics of translation. It's not a very easy job. It's not something, very easy to be done. But once we start translation, we need to discover that culture, that knowledge, and also we need to defend that particular philosophy or political ideas to reveal the new literature, be it our mother tongue or any other literature, as most of us are polyglots. So I really thank the Department of Translation Studies, Professor Tarakeshwar, Professor Lakshmi Haribandi, Professor Kokila, and your team of students who have organized it so seamlessly all these 4 days without any glitches and without any problems as we face in online webinars. So it was really a wonderful treat for all of us. I didn't know about this seminar earlier. Otherwise, I would have definitely thought of presenting a paper also. Thank you very much for organizing this seminar.
Thank you. Anyone else? Rather than just thanking us, if you could say, yes, Nina, you can.
I request you to allow me to keep my video off because of the lot of network issue that I'm facing here in Maharashtra, Nanded.
Sure.
I just in a couple of sentences, I would like to, sir, though you said do not thank us, I would like to start by expressing my appreciation to the entire organizing committee for this wonderful seminar, I think, which will be remembered by all of us for a very long time. Firstly, because by giving it 4 days, you have done justice to the topic. In a very long time, it was the first time I felt that we were able to explore translation studies and translation practice in, let us say, in a way that did justice to its extent and scope, which is something that I have regretted at many a conference that I have participated in before. So I would really like to appreciate that fact. And what can I say about the invited speakers? On a lighter note, I would just say that it is like in basketball, you have something called the dream team. I would like to say that these 5 speakers that we listened to over the course of 4 days were the dream team that I don't think any of us will forget. Their statements will make us rethink our translation research and practice, will lead us to new directions of thought. I'm definitely expressing the views of all the participants and listeners, I think, here. And therefore, thank you, sir. I understand what an immense effort of organization it must have been to bring these thinkers together so that we could listen to them over the course of these 4 days. So once again, I thank the organizing team for that. And what I really appreciate about this conference, whether it be the invited speakers, whether it be the papers presented during the past 4 days, or the discussions that followed, was that if I had to resume it in a sentence, I would say that this conference did not pay lip service to the current problems and trends and let us say challenges of translation theory and practice, but made a genuine sustained effort over the course of 4 days to problematize the new ideas or the new trends that are coming up in translation, or even question the historical development of translation studies itself. It is something that I really appreciate and I have enjoyed. And I would like to specially mention the role of Takeshwar sir here, because I would say he was like that one, he was the binding agent that at the end of every session, I looked forward to listening to his comments and to the problems that he raised or the questions that he raised at that moment, because it always led to a more fruitful discussion in the final part of every session. So thank you very much, sir, for your interventions. And finally, I feel that this seminar on translation studies has far exceeded the title or the concept note that was stated at the beginning, and has exceeded our expectations. So thank you. I have purposefully not spoken in detail about any one paper because I'm sure there are many more speakers who would. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Anyone else?
May I?
Yeah, Usha, please.
Yeah, so yeah, well, lots of thanking happening, although you asked us not to thank you. I'm actually thankful that I managed to get into this conference because I have been thinking about translation and multilingualism for a very long time. And not because of the fact that I think that I am any sort of translator, or I am a great polyglot or anything like that. Not at all. It's only because of the fact that, I feel that in India, we are multilingual by our very presence in India, right? I mean, we can't be anything but multilingual, and therefore we grow up just translating all the time and never really thinking about translation. But only now I have actually started seriously thinking about translation, and I'm very glad that I managed to get into this conference and present that paper for whatever it was worth, and however the paper was. But one of the things that I was absolutely struck by is the amazing way in which your department organized it. And as Dr. Bogate was saying, it was absolutely seamless. Now, about the papers and about the discussion, I managed to attend in bits and pieces because of various other kinds of work at home, at work, right? I mean, currently I'm sitting in my cubicle at work and trying not to multitask. So, so because of that, I did not manage to attend a lot of papers. But the few I did, I felt that there was a lot of very good work happening in translation studies, and very young scholars are doing extraordinarily good work. And this conference was a very good opportunity, I suppose, for many people, very young scholars, to present their papers and to discuss, and there was enough scope given for discussion. And I actually thoroughly enjoyed today's plenary session, and I also listened to Professor Prasad's plenary session. And I asked Professor Prasad a question on YouTube, which I think I should have asked Professor Trivedi actually, about this translation and translatability, and what is comprehension when it comes to translated words. Now, this business of the Delhi Metro, where they request you to not walk on the tactile path. So in English they call it tactile path, which I don't know how many users of the metro actually understand. And then in Hindi they call it Sparshaniya Patti. Now, I think I must have heard it at least 100 times before I registered Sparshaniya Patti. So, who is it that is the audience for translation, right? What is it being translated for? Like, as Professor Trivedi was saying today, that the first thing is that translation should lead to comprehension. Right. So it made so your entire conference gave me many new ideas, and I'm really very thankful for the opportunity. And I should also thank my colleague Dr. Sanju Thomas, who gave me the courage to present the paper, because I sent this very ambitious abstract, and then I kept annoying her, saying that, can you please tell me what I should do, where should I start, and and obviously the usual suspects, right? So I asked her, do you think I should start with post-colonial translation, that reader by Professor Trivedi and Professor Basnet? I mean, is that a good starting point? Because as a new entrant, I knew nothing about this field, right? So I'm hoping that I would be able to learn a lot more from all of you who are senior scholars.
Did we lose her again? Okay, anyone else? Anyone else wants to talk? No, the entire idea of the seminar is to bring people who are producing knowledge in translation studies in various locations into one platform, so that we know what kind of knowledge is being produced in the field right now, and also spot people who are promising and then encourage them, and also look at put together this knowledge. So I don't know how far we have been successful in that. So in bringing senior scholars as well as young scholars together. Yes, Ajay Verma.
Hello, sir. It was really fruitful sessions for all the 4 days. I have listened all the sessions, almost all the sessions. Sir, actually, to mention, it is my first research paper. I was wondering whether it will be selected or not, but I was very happy when I received a message that it was selected. One more thing I want to add is, all these days I felt as an outsider to this academia, because only few of you know that I came from science background to literature. I did MSc in physics, and very recently I joined for MA comparative literature. So I was wondering whether I can connect it to these people or not, or whether my ideas all were very different from all the scholars who are presenting, or all the scholars who have done, who has already done some groundwork in the field. But during my presentation, I mean, after my presentation, when you asked questions, I really felt happy that I liked the way you welcomed me into this world. And what I'm feeling is the papers were really good. And since most of the paper presenters, they are coming from different parts of India and different languages they are working with, what I feel is they should carry back their knowledge, the knowledge what they have received here, and they should start working the same in their languages is what I feel. I mean, developing the translational discourse, the discourse of translation studies in their languages, I mean, in Indian languages especially, is what I feel. Because there is a large depth of this knowledge in our Indian languages, especially the discourse of translation in Indian languages.
Thank you, Ajay. Anyone else?
Tarakeshwar, there are a few comments in the chat box. Maybe you can see and read them.
Okay.
There is one by Komal Thakur. Thank you so much, Department of Translation Studies, IFLU, for this wonderful and enriching event. It was really exciting to listen to the great people from translation studies field, like Professor Trivedi, and all the plenaries, which would not have been possible for us without this seminar in the current scenario. All the paper presenters also added to our knowledge of the field. Overall, the event was conducted very smoothly and at the same time lively. Thank you all. Thank you so much. That's a message from Komal Thakur. Yeah, maybe there are some more.
Thank you, sir, for reading it. Anyone else would like to speak? You want to speak?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. So I would like to thank you very much for the to the organizing committee and to the Department of Translation Studies, IFLU, because like Ajay, this was also my very first time when I presented this paper, and I was really very apprehensive of the fact whether the paper would be selected for the seminar or not. But in a way, this seminar helped me to cross the self-constructed border that I had created myself, and I never happened to present any paper. And it also, the seminar helped me develop and come across so many ideas and so many insights. And like, for example, the case of medical humanities and these plenary sessions by the stalwarts of translation studies. So it helped us a lot, and I extend my deep gratitude and towards Professor and the Department of Translation Studies, IFLU. Thank you very much, sir. And I'm sure even, I mean, this would boost me up and would allow me to present more papers of the kind, because the field in which I am working, or I have been working, there's a lot more possibility to contribute to that, because from Italian to Hindi there have, I mean, rarely been any case of translations. Only 2 or 3 cases that I pointed out in my in the paper today. So I'm trying to sort of carry forward that stalled literary transactions between Italian and Hindi. So thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash Tripathi. Anyone else? Pragya, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, sir, that a seminar like this for a early researcher is something which is of great help, and I have been not able to honestly prepare myself how I would go about my research in translation studies despite doing MPhil in it. But this seminar has helped me a lot in giving me lots of clarity and giving lots of direction also to think about it, to come up with more ideas. So I'm really grateful that I could attend this seminar, and thank you for making me part of it.
Thank you, Pragya. Anyone else who would like to speak? Satyendra, you have unmuted yourself. You want to speak?
Just a minute, sir. My speaker is
go
not.
ahead.
Though I am from Indian and World Literature Department, but I really enjoyed being in this translation studies department. I have taken in my MA courses some of the papers. I really enjoyed the company. I miss the department. I feel that I should have been in already. From my heart, I feel that I should have been in translation studies department. And my work is also is on translation studies department, as Kokila ma'am and few others, my colleague knows that. So it was a really good session on poetry. I really enjoyed that some of the Hindi and Urdu poetry that I'm working on already presented the papers. And thank you, Tarkeshwar sir, for your organizing, and thank you all, Taresh and all others that who have organized this. I think we should keep organizing and keep conducting workshop like that, translating and keep motivating our scholars. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Satyendra. Anyone else who would like to speak? Yes. Please introduce yourself.
सर फ्लैग्स 10 बनवाए मैंने, उनको पे मैंने वो मार्क करवा दिए।
As I was saying, so we wanted to provide a platform to everyone who is working in translation studies, who is interested in translation studies, to be together and take the existing knowledge in translation studies forward. So that was the entire idea. Hope we have succeeded in at least 40-50% in that direction. So as I would like to thank all those people who made this possible. Statistics who put together the concept note and all our students who are instrumental in
I just want to see
contacting people, the concept note, getting people. Committee has done a seamless when the permission was, and of the university. We are all of you, please raise your papers on the lines of the discussions that we have had here, and please submit it to the department. Then we can think of bringing them together or putting them together. So we will be in touch with you. So it has been a great journey being with you for the past 4 days. So hope this 4 days journey will continue, because translation studies scholars have no independent platform in India. So hopefully we'll all be together in our journey, in our research in the field of trans. Thank you very much. So anyone else you would like to say anything before we wind up?
Thank you so much, sir. It was really an enlightening session and a time which I spent with all of you great dignitaries. And besides, I have learned a lot more about the translation studies since I'm into the translation from last few years, since I have started my PhD program as well. And though due to some reasons, I have happened to change my topic of translation, but I have remained in touch with these studies and have published almost 2-3 papers on the translation studies only. And last year I have also what I can say presented one of my papers in collaboration with the Sahitya Academy, which was also based on the translation studies. But here I have learned a lot more about the translation, and will be looking forward to have more intellectual association with the Department of EFLU Hyderabad. Thank you so much for this enlightening session.
Thank you. Sandal?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
First of all, I would like to thank the entire Department of Translation Studies and EFL University, our patron, Professor E. Suresh Kumar, for organizing such an enlightful event. I would call it event rather than a seminar, because it is not that I learned only, I enjoyed it so much. And during this past 4 days, since my research is basically into translation studies, but I belong to the Department of Hispanic Italian Studies and I teach Italian. But I learned a lot from all the papers, though somehow they were interrelated with each other. I learned a lot, I enjoyed a lot, and I came to know how from the very beginning, such writing research papers, presenting papers, they are how they can help in nurturing to go forward in any kind of advanced research program like PhD or D-letter also. Thank you so much for accepting my paper and giving me the opportunity to present here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Colleagues or other organizers who would like to speak? Professor Lakshmi, Dr. Kokila.
Kishore, I think I'm half asleep. It's 4 a.m. here today.
Okay, Snigdha want to speak, let us speak.
I think I must thank you and all the research scholars for working hard and making it a reality. As towards the end, I had to leave it on your shoulders and come here to the USA. So you did a wonderful job, and I'm really happy the way it went on.
We can pat each other's back later.
So yeah, I thank all the participants and paper presenters for their wonderful work. Everybody took their paper presentation very seriously. It's not just like reading something and going away, but really they put their heart and soul into the papers, and most of them are the working research papers. So I wish they would, all of them would revise their papers and submit them so that we can bring out an edited volume with the permission of our patron, Professor Suresh Kumar. Thank you so much, paper presenters, for your participation, for your papers. Keep in touch with us. Thank you.
Signa?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, I would just like to thank everyone because this conference was very unique in the sense that we were all able to listen to various regional perspectives, which we don't find in other conferences that happen. And the great thing about it is that it's there on YouTube. I and my friends and everyone in IIT Roorkee, we are watching it from YouTube. And this rich and very frank discussion on several important issues that were raised during the conference on translation. I believe that it has helped us all to understand each other's perspective and each other as human beings as well. And it could not have been possible without all the research scholars of translation studies. Some of my friends are there, Ramki and Satyendra, they are all working very hard. So I like to thank everyone for organizing such a great conference, and I look forward for more such events and learn a lot from you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, Kokila, you would like to do final vote of thanks?
No, no, I should thank you to lead, take the lead and
Just do that patting your back, but
Pardon?
acknowledge others.
Yeah.
Can,
No, I'm
pat
coming.
you
I'm coming to
back
that.
later.
I'm coming to that. Yes. And not only that, but under your leadership, I think we all could do whatever was needed. You took all the care, and others also. All the our team members, committee members, all our scholars and participants, also paper presenters and the plenaries. We were really, it was a feast, I should say that. We really enjoyed it. And we had a very rich experiences. Thanks to you and thanks to Professor Lakshmi and everybody else who made it possible. All our technical teams as well as compilers, everybody, all the without who I mean even the chairs, right? I would who have taken all the pains out of their schedules, who came to our rescue. So the students also participated very enthusiastically, and they did their best, I should say, to make it, to materialize this. And 4 days, when Professor Lakshmi said 4-day conference, then I was thinking 4 days. Then generally we have only 3 days, and we were also like planning to have half a day only, but because going by the response and the number of abstracts that we got, we planned it for 4 days and 4 into 10. So 40 papers like that. And I think it was a wonderful experience for everybody. So Tarkeshwar, should it be like you mean to say that I should make it a vote of thanks to everybody? Thanks to the chair, thanks to the chairs, thanks to the organizers, thanks to all the participants.
One request. One second.
Yeah.
So if those who couldn't give the negative feedback, please do it so by email. If you don't want to give the negative feedback online when it is streamed on YouTube, no problem. But we need that to correct ourselves and to improve further. So please send your negative feedback if there's any, even as suggestions, if not as negative feedback, through our email. You can reach to us. So no problem.
Yes. So it was a wonderful experience. Thanks to all the plenaries and keynotes. Professor Harish Trivedi being the last one, but we had a big bang, I should say that, kind of serious notes, but in such a very light note, right? Serious things discussed on a very lighter notes. And we began with Sherry Simon delivering her keynote address, and after that we had Dorothy. Both of them, I mean, it was, I would say, they took lots of, like they started at for 12:30 in the night, and then it must have gone through at least an hour, maybe at the risk of their health, and sitting awake, and not only awake but presenting such a enlightening um, talks was we were really grateful to them. We are all, I mean, we are grateful to all the plenary speakers and the keynote speaker, as well as the participants and those who attended the YouTube channel also. Like, thanks to, I should also thank Nikhila for providing us the platform, right, readily. Otherwise, perhaps it would have been difficult for us to do that. So yeah, and that was one good thing that she has come up to save us, or rather like make it more successful, I would say that. So yeah, thanking all the chairs and participants and our students coming up with the what I say, the video introductory notes and all those kind of things was something which was very good, I think I should say. And thanks everyone for that who participated in that. That was also not a one-man work. It was a collaborative work. And I think we all did well as a team. And let us hope that we would be taking up more, and we could see very active participants like Neena Gokte and Usha and others, like Ajay also has been there, and some other very active who have been there all the time for 4 days, right? And Ipshita Chanda and others I've seen come. I could see some Professor Dilip. I do not know. I was wondering whether it was from the Marathwada University, but I just tried to contact him. He said, no, it was not him. Then I was wondering, who is this Professor Dilip? So who was, who participated, but he was not seen. I mean, he did not interact. So I thank, on behalf of the Department of Translation Studies, I thank each and everyone. Thank you very much. And we hope to conduct, in future, some good programs again. It has been a long time actually. So whatever drought, it was a kind of a drought, I would say. For many years, we didn't have any events. I mean, unless this, for this scale, like we just had a one-day workshop on poetry translation, but a seminar of this magnitude, I would say, was not organized. So I'm very happy that we could do so with the cooperation of everyone. Yeah. Thank you very much. And as Professor Tarkeshwar has said, I would just like to remind in the end that please keep working on your papers and revise them, and then maybe you can send it so that we can plan to publish. Is that okay, Tarkesh?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And all those who have presented the papers, you will get your certificates. We will send it to you. So that should not be a worry. And all those who participated regularly will also get the certificate. That should not be a worry. So don't think about all those issues. Because nowadays, with digitalization of knowledge, the points, those things have also become important. So don't worry about it. That will happen. If you keep working, if you attend conference, you present paper, you will acquire points. That should not be a problem. So don't worry about that. But think about revising your paper and then submitting it. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Sir, I just wanted to suggest something. If you had asked about
Satyendra,
suggestion.
go ahead.
Yeah, this is Satyendra, sir, from IW department. I just wanted to suggest that can we build a platform like a modern poetry in translation, like West has. We could where we could upload our translation or talk about the translation, because these seminars happen once in a 6 months or 3 months. So where we should have a platform at least all over India, where because we are in India, we are multilingual, so we can post our translation, talk about the translation. So I think we should contribute. Like I can contribute all the money, so there will be less as cost of developing a website, and we can talk about the translation. So there will be really help, and we could from there we could organize a workshop of translation. That if we could we can work on that. There will be
down the details of it. What we can do?
Yes, sir.
We can put it down and then circulate it. We
Yes,
can all
sir.
discuss it and then come out with it.
Yes, sir. I will mail it to Taresh Bhaiya.
Okay, fine.
Thank you very much, sir.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Harish Trivedi. Thank you, Professor Padikal, for being with us. So I know it's late afternoon, but you people have been with us, and all the scholars, senior scholars, whom we requested, they happily came here and they spent time, and some of them spent time when they were not supposed to spend it. So we are very grateful to all of you and all the participants. And again, thanks to all my department colleagues and to our research scholars who worked tirelessly all these 4 days. Thank you.
Ajay is saying that there should be Translation Studies Association, just like CLI. Association of Translation
We'll think
Studies
about
Scholars.
it. We'll discuss it later.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, Ajay, thank you. Thank you very much.
It's good to see that even at the end, there are 25 people here and then many on YouTube.
How much ever you want to drive
You don't see
people
this
around.
actually in real conferences. So when it
Yeah,
comes to
unless
the end
you
session,
say
people will be catching their train and then leaving or doing shopping and then going out. So nobody will be there in the valedictory. That's why we did not keep the valedictory. We kept Harish Trivedi for the last day. And he also wanted it in the afternoon. We said, fine. So we had this discussion, open house discussion at the end. Good to see that 25 people are still there online.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
these
really a
people will
remarkable one.
Yeah,
We have
these
been
people
able
will
to forge
remain.
this community in the last 4 days.
I think these people will remain with us until you say bye-bye and we can leave or we can wrap up. They don't want to leave.
We will log out. We will log out, but we will keep in touch, all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, Tarkeshwar. Yeah, Lakshmi had something to say.
I think our students and we remain. Yeah.
Okay.